I learned two lessons very early in life. Sex is the answer to everything, and I am incredibly damaged goods.
Okay, so what I'm about to say is probably the most obvious statement that I've ever made, and that's really saying something considering how many episodes there are of the show and how often I make really obvious statements and act as though they're revelatory. But the thing I want to say is it's kind of incredible how much our family and our early years define us. Okay, I warned you that it was a really obvious statement, but I've been thinking, like, so much of who I am is because of who they are, right? And the same could probably be said in reverse as well, like, so much of who they are is because of who I am. But there's something really interesting in the messages that we choose to internalize and how difficult those are to shake off throughout our lives. But, like, what would happen if we just did? Like, if we just stopped believing all of those things about ourselves that we, up until now, thought were innate or hardwired or just happen to be who we are and how we move through the world? What if they're not who we are? What if they're just who we tell ourselves we are? And what would happen if we just decided to be someone else? Okay, that's probably enough navel gazing and following my own question spiral. Why don't I introduce you to this week's guest, who happens to be the person who sent me down this rabbit hole. He is Brian Gryphon, a queer neurodelightful Canadian who is a photographer, tarot card reader, and poet. We got together to talk about his days living in Toronto and how he graduated from the bar scene to start going to Club Manatee, a club that was in existence in that magical decade of the 1970s. So put on your bell-bottom trousers and your platform shoes and let's go. My name is Kay Anderson. This is Lost Spaces, the podcast all about lost queer spaces and how they changed who we are, how they shaped who we are. Why don't we find out about Brian's story?
I moved back to Toronto, the city of my birth, a couple of years after graduating high school, and after having come out in that small city's local newspaper, and moved in with my parents. Got a
wait. No. Coming out in the newspaper? What?
Oh, we need to go back a little further than that. Okay. I graduated high school in 1977. I wasn't officially out, but people would kid, you must be gay, etc. And I just ignored them all because they were country bumpkins and I was a city boy trapped in a village of 1,000 people. So graduated, moved to the nearest small city, got a job in a camera store because I'm a photographer, and joined a local theater group. The daily newspaper had a letter to the editor from some person who had listened to a quote-unquote gay activist speaking on the CBC, the National Radio Network. And she wrote a bunch of BS in response to it. So being trained to speak my mind, I wrote a letter to the editor contradicting all of her points and basically accusing her of being an idiot, politely. So I thought, well, now that I've written a letter to the editor, I suppose I should officially come out to my family. So I wrote a letter to Mom and Dad. To surprise, Mom got the letter, called me up, and was very warm and welcoming and pretended to be a bit surprised. I don't know that they were. She said that Dad would reach out in a couple of days, and it took him maybe a week. And actually, I have a better relationship with him than I did with her. So but he called, and I got lucky. He was an incredibly cliched, middle class, very British white guy. So feelings weren't really talked about. It was all just sort of innuendo and stuff. And he had learned that, for example, Catholics weren't the devil, that people who didn't speak English well were not necessarily incredibly stupid. They may just have been learning a new language. Things like that. Kid faced all these things. And so when I came out, it was like, okay, well, maybe what I had thought about gay people was wrong. So it took him a week or so to process that and look at it and go, okay. And so from that moment on, I was always more comfortable that he fully accepted me. I think Mom presumed that she had to be accepting and therefore wouldn't admit to or process any problems. For example, my quote-unquote promiscuity, things like that. She couldn't, because she was so accepting of me as a gay person, she couldn't deal with any problem she might have come across. So she was always a bit whatever, and Dad was just like, shit happens, I deal with it and move on.
Well, can I just ask a few questions to explore this a bit more? Are you saying that your mum thought she was more accepting than she was?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, yeah, she just figured, I love him, he's gay, I don't care, but that blocked her to seeing anything else she had a problem with, such as my going up Friday night and coming back Sunday.
That blocked her, or she did have a problem with you being gay and it came out in other ways?
They're both possible answers, and I don't know. A, we never talked about it. B, we can't talk about it now because both my parents are deceased. The biggest thing I learned about my family is that what I thought was a loving, accepting openness was actually a unwillingness to be upset or express feelings. So it may seem like everything was wonderful, but middle-class white British people didn't talk about it. We just barged through and ignore the feelings.
Oh, and then make snide remarks every now and then.
Oh, well, yeah. Yeah, and of course, being a gay person, that was how it came out very strongly in me. So.
You adapted, tucked toward it.
I did.
Is it too soon to talk about this promiscuity thing that you've just mentioned?
No, not at all. I was raised in a family where sex was never presented as a bad thing or a dirty word, and therefore I assumed it was okay. What I didn't know was how much, you can edit it if you want, how much shit was going on that I wasn't aware of. And one of the reasons why we moved so often, as in we moved to the fourth town the summer I started middle school, my 10th birthday.
Oh, wow.
So there was a lot of stuff that just wasn't talked about. I just thought everything was okay. And as a result of that, all four of us kids are hypersexualized. And so sex was a good thing. Sex felt great. Sex meant not having to deal with emotions, because you thought you were dealing with emotions, but actually you were just, dealing with the drug and the natural hormone drugs for getting fucked, or fucking as the case may be.
So in your circumstance, you were using sex to avoid things. Is that what you're saying? I'm
saying all of us used sex to avoid all sorts of stuff, avoid emotions, avoid commitment. I mean, if one, and this is the British coming at me, if one chooses to engage in a lot of sex, it's not because one doesn't want to make a commitment, it's because one is committed to free. And as a gay person coming out in the late 70s, it was like, this is my gay pride coming out. This is, I'm going to go around and have lots of sex. And then when the AIDS virus became known as the AIDS virus hit, again, having a lot of sex safely with people was as much political as it was personally avoiding things.
Yeah. But you're not saying that that's always the case, that having sex with lots of people is avoiding things. You're just saying that in your specific circumstances. For me, yes, which is all that I can speak to, is for me, and to the extent I understand my siblings, and we've gotten very close over the years. Yeah, that was pretty much the family dynamic, was the four of us. That was a great way to
avoid talking about things or thinking about things or feeling about things was to focus just on the orgasm.
Mm-hmm. Can you talk to me more about sex being a political act and what you mean by that?
To be an active gay man having sex with other gay men, especially multiple partners over a weekend in a bathhouse or in the park, or all those acts of rebellion are political. I was never closeted. Once I came out, I don't know if I was really in the closet before that so much as we just, again, family didn't talk about stuff, but I've never been back in the closet since that I came out. That would have been the summer of 1978.
But what about the act is political? Just existing and experiencing joy?
Being out and proud and walking the streets in the quote-unquote gay ghetto in Toronto, the gay village, they prefer to call it now. Going to the bathhouse, going to bars, going to the parks and having sex is inherently political. Even if one is doing it out of shame, then it's a different political statement, which is I have to hide and I'm, etc. I have to do it this way. I chose to do that as well as form relationships, and it was all political because it was all saying no matter what laws are against me or what natural threats are out there, such as the virus, this is me and I'm going to be me. One of the things that I've learned in the unmasking process, not only am I neurodivergent, I have masked up pretty much my entire early life except for my sexuality. That was the one thing that I just couldn't gloss over to fit in.
Why do you think that is?
Because I'm an incredibly stubborn Leo with a Sagittarian moon rising, and raised in a family where sex was the answer to everything. I mean, it wasn't said that bluntly, but that was the lesson I got. I learned two lessons very early in life. Sex is the answer to everything, and I am incredibly damaged goods. So those two are what led me the path to here.
Lots to unpack here. So first of all, are you a Leo with a Sagittarius rising?
Sagittarian
Is that
moon
what you
rising,
said?
yes.
Sagittarian moon rising. So what does that mean?
As a Leo, I would tend to prefer the spotlight. A Leo who's, I like to have a lot of hair, but as a Sagittarian, it was back in the day, of course, brown hair, which is not so brown anymore.
Wait, what? So what? You like long hair because it makes you the center of attention, but it's brown, so you're not that much the center of attention. Is that what you're saying?
Wasn't what I was saying, but that certainly could be an interpretation. Yes, as Leos tend to like long manes.
Oh, I see. Okay,
yeah,
okay.
But Leo also theoretically, and I'm neither a believer or a disbeliever in astrology or the 6 tarot and oracle decks I have. I'm agnostic in the true sense of the word. I don't know whether it really makes sense or not.
Yeah. I'm sorry to be like on the attack. Like, what do you mean? What do you mean? Like,
it wasn't an attack, but it's a fair question. I proceed to spout a statement of somebody who obviously knows more than just their sun sign. Therefore, it's arguable that I have some interest in or belief in it.
But that doesn't quite explain to me then why you masked lots of things in your life other than your sexuality, and why your sexuality was the one thing that you couldn't mask.
Okay, so why did I mask? It's one question, and why did I not mask the sexuality? So the first question is, why did I feel the need to mask my entire life, or most of my life? I was born, presumably slapped on the ass. Then I had the tip of my dick cut off without any consent. And within a few days, I woke up in extreme pain in my right foot, to find both my feet trapped in a torture device that I could not possibly understand as an infant. That was my introduction to the world. Mm-hmm. And then led to a family that didn't talk about feelings, parents who were doing their best but had plenty of issues of their own. I was the third of what would be 4 children of a family that really only wanted 2 children. They were happy with 2 children. And then I came along, and then less than 2 years later, my sister came along. Mom was probably suffering postpartum. There was a lot of shit that made me believe that I was damaged goods and wasn't worthy and had to hide everything about myself. but sexuality I just couldn't. And there was all this stuff going on that made me mask up every true aspect of myself. This one particular aspect didn't get masked. I don't know why, I just know it didn't.
Isn't it fascinating though? Like there's so many people where that's the case, where despite everything around you saying it's probably best if you don't talk about this or that you don't exhibit these particular characteristics in public, you just can't. You can't squash that bit of yourself down.
Yeah.
And like, I mean, this is a bigger question I'm not expecting you to have an answer to, but it's just like, why is that? Like, why was I not able to just fit in when I was growing up? I just couldn't do it. Like, no matter how hard I tried, no matter how many pep talks I gave myself, it was just like, ugh, no, this is me squeezing out through the cracks in the concrete.
I mean, arguably, if we can hide some aspects, we should be able to hide any of the others. So why this particular one? Maybe it's that important inherently in a human to their sexuality. And maybe it's become that important because the way modern Western society focuses so much on sexuality as a primary part of our identity. You know, how much of it's nature, how much of it's nurture.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there are some people who are able to mask it. There are some people who are able to not tell anyone and go their entire lives without letting on. And then there are those of us who are just like, nah, I'm gay. Sorry, you're going to have to know about it. Okay, so I'm aware that we started in Toronto and now we're not in Toronto. So why don't we get there? So you moved to Toronto. What was the plan?
Well, a plan. I had come out, and it was a small city called Chatham. I don't know, 35,000 people, I guess, at the time. Written letter to the editor. I got fired from my job at Kmart. I'd only been there for a short time, so they didn't even have to give me a reason, but they tried very hard to tell me it had nothing to do with the letter in the newspaper, which eventually came out. But I couldn't find another job. I actually collected welfare for a short time after the unemployment benefits ran out. And I just said, this is not happening. I called Mom and said, can you come down with the car and get me and my little load of stuff and take me to Toronto? And she did. So I moved in with them in their 2-bedroom apartment for a little while. And I paused there a little while because I don't know whether you want to skip over the total psychotic break and the mononucleosis and go right into the fun part of living a gay life or not.
Oh, well, what do you want to do? Is that important to the story?
To the story of the manatee, not at all. To my story, I would say, yeah, psychotic break probably qualifies as an event.
So before we get to that, just a point of clarification. So your mum was living in Toronto at the time?
Yeah, Mum and Dad had, after I came out to them, Dad had yet again gotten a transfer, possibly for legitimate reasons this time instead of some of the problems before. But they had moved to Toronto, to an apartment in Toronto. So yeah, I had moved in. Mm-hmm. I moved in with them. And eventually managed to get myself together and get a room in a roomy house downtown.
But okay, and so then tell me about the psychotic break.
What I know of my psychotic break is based on two distinct memories that have been in my head, have been totally separated as unrelated and therefore unimportant matters, because that was the only way I could apparently process it. So I had been having some sex, hadn't had a relationship, I hadn't dated, but I definitely had had some sex. I was sitting in a neighborhood bar, and the memory is at some point I got up, placed my glass of soda down, walked towards University Avenue, which has the most of the hospitals, the bulk of hospitals in downtown Toronto, and told myself, I think I might be having a panic attack. So there's that memory. That's the memory. It ends with me walking to, not panicking, not looking for a cab or calling an ambulance, just walking to a hospital, which was 5-6 blocks away. It wasn't super close. And then the next distinct memory is telling my boss at the pharmacy whose photo department I was, basically taking in film for processing, that I appreciated the job. I hoped it would be there when I came back, but I needed to leave town. And I went to Williamsburg, Virginia, which is basically a living museum. It's Rockefellers back in the Depression poured in millions of dollars to rebuild a lot of the important parts of the colonial capital. And I spent time there and then eventually came back. My memory of the date is demonstrably wrong, but that's the way memories are. And I did come back and I did get my job back, and I had that job until I was out for months with mononucleosis being hidden by strep throat. And at that, I was off for months, and the pharmacy was like, "No, we need somebody who's going to actually work."
So the beginning of your time in Toronto was not the most fun, to put it lightly.
There was nothing obvious to trigger the psychotic break, but something did. And that's when I stopped going to bars and I went to the Club Manatee. I had heard about that, and it was unlicensed after hours and dance and stuff. So I took a break from the bars and I did eventually go back because bars were pretty much the heart of our community back then.
So tell me about Club Manatee then.
It was a great place. I met my first boyfriend, and then I also met the first long-term relationship I had at that club. It was fun. It was a great place to dance, and there were a lot of sex workers there, and I had no interest in paying for them, but they were certainly nice to look at. Tended to make the crowd very evenly split between the younger crowd that was there to dance and or work and the older crowd who was mostly there for the sex workers. I loved it. I loved going there. It was great to dance. I didn't go there, I don't think, as much to meet partners. I would go to the bathhouse to have sex. I would go there to dance. It had a bigger dance floor than any of the bars I had been to at that point, and pretty good music. It was a great place to go have fun, dance, and sometimes actually meet people.
And so do you remember first hearing about the place?
No. I either heard about it from somebody at a meeting of Gay Youth Toronto, which was a social group that met at the community center in the heart of the ghetto, or there was a monthly publication called The Body Politic. It was published in Toronto that would, in addition to being heavily political, would also have ads for bars and clubs and stuff like that. So one or the other place.
Do you remember the first time you ever went?
Not specifically, no. I went back, so it wasn't terrifying.
It was, and you got into that kind of thing.
So if I don't remember it, it's either a memory that's being blocked because it's so horrific, or it was so ordinary that after 2 years, actually I wasn't there that long. So I would have started in 78. I met Chip in 79. I met Isaac in 80. We didn't go there all that much, and it closed in 80. The club closed in 84. It got turned into something else. The building did eventually, I believe, get torn down, but that was, I loved it because it was a great place to dance, but when I met Isaac, I didn't have to go out dancing until 3 o'clock in the morning all the time, and that's what it was for me.
Oh, and why, pray tell, might that be?
That I didn't need to go dancing?
Yeah.
Because Isaac and I lived together for theoretically 7 years. There was a gap when he took some time off and went to England to study. But yeah, so also the two of us had started exploring our leather fetish kink interests. So there were other places to go as well.
To do that. Tell me about meeting Isaac then.
I had sort of seen him. He is an incredible person. He was very cute, dirty brown hair, incredibly sexy, and he walked up to me. I was sitting on the edge of the stage, which wasn't in use, so it was a common place for people to sit. He walked up and asked me to dance. And I said, God, yes. And then we started dancing. He was wearing a black T-shirt with the arms cut off with his name, Isaac, and those wonderful iron-on letters of that time period in sparkly gold. And he said, my name is Isaac. And I said, I know. And he sort of gave me a look, and I said, well, God, you're sure. So that's the night we met. And that was a 7-year relationship, a lifetime of whatever.
So obviously I know like hindsight's 50-50 and you fill in gaps in your brain and stuff. But just go with me on the questioning that I'm about to take you on. Did you know immediately?
Not at the club, but by the next morning, yeah.
Well, how did you know?
How did I know? I don't know. I mean, that's like saying, what is love?
Well, actually, whilst we're here, what is love?
The greatest joy and the greatest heartache all wrapped up in one. That's what love is.
Oh.
And that's what it's got to do with it.
Baby, don't hurt me.
So that night we met at the club. We went back to my rented room in a row house downtown that was being converted. It was owned by a gay couple, and they turned it into a roomy house while they were saving money to renovate it. And I had a room there, and we not only had sex, I also started reciting some of my, I was going to add a judgment word. I started reciting to him some of my poetry, and he didn't run, and that's when I knew.
Come on, surely the criteria is greater than that.
Well, I'm sure, but that's what I can honestly recall of what it was that said.
That's the moment.
I don't know that I said he's the one, because I don't know if I ever believed in the one. But as far as a one, as far as a special person that I wanted in my life, absolutely, there was no doubt.
It's so funny, isn't it? It's like the knowing, but sometimes I think the knowing is actually just us forcing something.
Wanting. Yes, I want to. But I would say, based on as much self-knowledge as I have now, that I did love him and do love him, and he did love me, and it was never going to happen. It was never going to be long-term because of me.
Oh, are you at peace with that?
More or less. There's very little I'm truly at peace with, which of course is why I have both a talk therapist and a psych nurse who can dispense meds. You may have noticed, and certainly your listeners may have noticed, I talk a lot about my mental health because there's nothing I'm ashamed of. I'm saddened by a lot of the losses that it has brought me, but I'm not ashamed of it. And I look back at everything I've been through and I go, actually, I'm a pretty strong person. I went through all that and here I am functional. And it's so different from the story I was told as an infant, that I was damaged goods. I was a special needs child, although we didn't use that terminology back then. And I've spent most of my entire life believing that, and only now starting to recognize how arguably false all of that was.
But I did want to talk about that before, and then the conversation moved on. So you said that when you were a child, you believed this message that you were given, that you were damaged goods. But how was that message relayed to you? Was it just through like the words and the actions of people around you?
Everything. I was born with TEV, which is short for the Latin for clubfoot. And so the corrective procedure at the time was they immediately went into the foot, cut tendons, and then put the foot in a baby shoe that was attached to a bar. And they would slowly, over time, move the foot to the normal position. And the other foot was in the other shoe doing nothing except for restraining you. And it was all in a heavy metal bar. Now I can look back at it and say that's what gave me at least that aspect of a normal life. I was never great at sports, and perhaps never could be with that. But I could walk and appear normal. I could walk and run, stuff like that, not having the club foot dragged behind me and you know, all that sort of stuff. So it was a great long-term procedure. But at the time, again, I was an infant, and all I knew is that I was not good enough as I was, that I immediately underwent these 2 operations. Then I was raised in a family where I was the third of what would be 4 kids, parents who wanted 2. That was their goal. They had a boy and then they had a girl. They were like, well, this is great. This is exactly what we want. And then I came along, and then my younger sister came along. And I'm pretty sure Mom had postpartum depression and whatever else was going on between my parents and everything else going on. We moved. The first move was before I started kindergarten. We had moved to another city. So this was my introduction to the world. Was I wasn't good enough. I had to be fixed immediately. Parents who were trying very hard to love me, and I had to pack up and move, which again was one of 4 moves while I was still a kid. So I have all sorts of attachment and abandonment and unhealthy issues caused by all that. So, and yeah, I was physically not strong. I was, whether I would have been if I had born with a regular foot, who knows? But I certainly was not physically strong. And as a sort of closeted middle child gay kid trying to fit in and be nice, I was like, oh, well, of course I'm weak. You know, I mean, that's what all gay kids are, which is not true. But back at the time, certainly that was my understanding.
Yeah. That kind of stereotype of queer kids being soft or weak. So how did you respond as a child to that feeling of being damaged? Did you double down on trying to fit in, or did you reject what you saw as rejection?
I tried to fit in with the family, and I tried to ignore the outside world. So I didn't act out and get wild and crazy. That would come later. And then, although I'm probably almost as smart as my brother, who is an incredibly smart person, I was definitely not prepared to see myself as being anywhere as good as he. He was the firstborn. He was a golden child. His first name, his dad's first name, who was our grandfather's first name. When we were young, we called him by his middle name. That was the deal that Mom and Dad had, was that, you know, the first boy would be James whatever, and we would call him whatever. You know, and he was a golden child, and so he graduated high school and then went and proceeded to play and sing in a traveling band across the province and stuff like that. And that was whatever, like that was what he did, because he could do what he wanted. And so I was as the, you know, damaged goods, not planned third child trying to please everybody. The way I was going to be as good as him. I mean, it seemed obvious, I guess, at the time.
And so was the response to just like not even try?
In some things, I mean, I didn't fail classes. I didn't like just not do schoolwork, but if I got an 80%, I was happy, because I figured that was good enough. Like, it was good enough to be a good grade. And I didn't worry about trying to be 90, because JB would have been 100. So like, I wasn't going to match him. So as long as I was better than average, then okay.
So we've gone a bit off the manatee.
Yeah.
Why was it the space that you wanted to talk about today?
Well, I met Chip, who was the first person I dated, as in we dated. We never actually had sex, which...
Sorry, I don't know why I responded that way.
Yeah.
You didn't have sex?
We didn't have sex.
What did you talk about?
But not having sex. About all the sex he used to have before he gave up. So I met Chip there. I met Isaac there. I danced a lot. I learned a lot about myself. And after it closed, I was sad that other people weren't going to be able to have that experience. I didn't need it, didn't feel the need for it. I had other places I could go, but it wasn't the first club. It was in an area that it had, apparently in the early 70s, the gay bars that were around were pretty much all on Yonge Street, which is the main street in Toronto, or just off of it, which is like 2 or 3 major streets away from where the gay village moved to before it then moved again. So it was sort of fading out as people moved to the new part of town. So it was still a bit of a tie to history. It was, and there are 2 poems in my chapbook that were part of the Manatee trilogy. The third one didn't make the editing cut. And both of those are about people. One I met in the club, the other who I met outside the club, and we had sex in alcove off the alley beside the club. So it's an important part of my life. That's why I wanted to look at it.
Well, so expand this sentence for me. You said, I learned a lot about myself when talking about Club Manatee. Mm-hmm. So what did you learn about yourself?
I learned I love to dance. I learned that I could get people to have sex with me without having to go to the steam bath. And that's different because you go to the steam bath, everyone supposedly is going to the steam bath specifically to look for sex. Therefore, having sex at the steam bath does not mean that you're a hot piece of property. It could just mean you're the only...
It means you're there.
You're there, right. Whereas at the Manatee, I met a couple of people that I have sex with. I met 2 people that I have relationships with. So I learned that, and sort of off topic, but it makes sense. In the slide presentation we projected at our wedding, there's pictures side by side. There's my husband at Claw, which is a leather event in Cleveland, looking incredibly sexy. And the other side is me wearing leather pants. I would have been in my 30s because this was taken back in Toronto after the last relationship ended. So I was a little older than my husband was in his picture, but close to the same age. And I looked at that picture, and for the first time, I could honestly say, that boy was hot. It wasn't everyone's taste, whatever. But that boy was hot. And I've spent pretty much 60 years not believing that. And that started with the Manatee, and it took 40 years, but hey, I'm a slow learner sometimes.
Oh, it's that cliche that's really annoying when anyone says it, but now I'm going to say it, so sorry, that like youth is wasted on the young, right?
Yeah.
Like you're just so full of insecurities and second guessing everything about yourself, and then people external to you are looking at you like, what the hell is wrong with you? Get on with things.
Yeah. I mean, many cliches have or had at some point, a grain of truth. So,
but learning that about yourself is so huge that like you're not as hideous as you thought you were. I'm not saying you were hideous, but just like the self-image that you have of yourself is like complete fabrication, right?
Yeah. Unattractive, damaged goods, not wanted, was an accident. That's, that's not exactly a healthy beginning.
No. Well, it's not healthy at any time in your life, but it's very easy to fall into that trap. Oh, I think I might be having a revelation right now.
Oh.
All right, that is us for yet another week. I'm going to go and do more pondering and thinking and overthinking and worrying and then considering why I've thought so much about the thing that everyone else knows already about, and then get paranoid about it and worry about it and think about it some more. So that should be a fun afternoon. Anyway, if you enjoyed this conversation and you want to find out more about Brian, then I encourage you to do so. He can be found at digitalgryphon.com, or you can find him on Instagram at Brian Gryphon, and I will make sure to include more information in the show notes for this episode. Whilst you're at it, why don't you follow me on Instagram or TikTok at Lost Spaces Pod? And other than that, I hope you have a fantastic week, because I think you deserve it. Yeah, I do. I really do. All right, I'm off. See you soon.